Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yoshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, we've had the UN General Assembly, so a lot of leaders have been able to voice their disapproval of one another. President Iran being one of them, telling the United States President to stop bullying. We also have in the news this week another leader, President Macron, saying that for there to be peace in Israel, we need the two-state solution. So those details and also some more on Syria and the false flag chemical attack that they continue to say is about to take place. But first, Ukraine's commercial shipping industry has been hit hard this summer as the ports where cargo would be received and sent out are vacant of ships. Now, one port worker in Mariupol told TRT World News, "It's summer, the peak of the working season, but we don't have any ships to work with." Now, the cargo is there with cranes waiting to load it, but he says the ships have become, quote, very rare visitors to our port.
Wow. Well, the port of Mariupol used to be constantly busy, but it started to slow down back in May when Russia completed a 19-kilometer bridge over the Kerch Strait, which is the only route into the Sea of Azov, where Ukraine's ports are located. The bridge's arches are too low for some larger ships to pass under, and in this way, Moscow is being accused of restricting vessel size into the sea.
Right, you kind of had to figure they realized that when they built it, the large vessels wouldn't be able to go underneath the bridge. Well, in addition, any ships that could make it under the Russian bridge are subject to lengthy border checks by Russian officials. Now, sometimes the process can take up to 5 days. The result has been a significant drop in shipping traffic and, in turn, economic losses for the country.
Well, in the eastern part of the country, Ukraine forces have been at war with Kremlin-backed rebels for years now, which has killed 10,000 people. Kiev, the European Union, and the United States says Russia is now deliberately trying to blockade Ukraine by, one, expanding its military presence in the Sea of Azov, and two, escalating tensions through economic pressure.
Well, President Putin maintains that Russia's actions are solely for the purpose of maintaining its own security. But the Sea of Azov has been extremely important to Ukraine's economy ever since the government lost control of the port of Sevastopol, located on the Black Sea, back in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. Now, the Kerch Strait then became a crucial route through which 80%, yes, 80% of Ukraine's exports pass.
Yeah, so that's definitely putting a huge, like you said earlier, economic pressure on the countries, because they depend on, things being exported as well as things being imported to the country to keep their economy flowing. Well, places like Mariupol and Berdyansk began to receive cargo traffic that previously went to other Ukrainian ports in the peninsula. So at this point, the conflict is an economic one, but as both sides continue to increase their military presence in the Sea of Azov, and no resolution has been agreed upon for the Kerch Strait, there are fears it could escalate into something much worse.
Well, the United States also is concerned about Russia's naval buildup. Top Pentagon officials are warning the Russian Navy hasn't operated at such high levels since the Cold War. Thus, the U.S. believes they need to take countermeasures to protect their interests. Admiral John Richardson of the U.S. Navy referred to the high level of Russian submarine activity in the North Atlantic as being, quote, more than we've seen in 25 years, end quote.
Well, moving south now to Syria, President Bashar al-Assad said his military is ready to take back the last remaining rebel-held territory in the country, that of Idlib. While the capital, of Damascus has been sending out additional forces to the front lines of Idlib, they are still saying they would like to try to reconcile with the other side if they are willing. But leader of Tahrir al-Sham, the major militant group controlling the province, has warned other factions not to participate in any talks with Damascus.
At the same time, the Kremlin says they have intelligence that jihadists are preparing for and intend to stage a chemical attack, which they plan to blame on the Assad government once again. And we've mentioned this several times already. It's yet to take place, but they continue to say that regardless of who does it, it's going to be Assad's government at fault.
That's right. Well, in a statement to RT, Russian Defense Minister Igor Konashekov said a strike on Kafir Zeta using poison-laden missiles is planned within the next 48 hours. Thus, some players outside the region are preparing yet more provocations on Syrian soil involving chemical weapons, with the aim of destabilizing the situation there and undermining the positive dynamics of the ongoing peace process.
Moscow also warns the White Helmets, who are known to be a pro-rebel group, will be on the scene of a chemical weapons attack first with cameras and tweets as they have in the past. And of course, the United States and its allies are already prepared for a retaliatory strike on Syria should such a report be spread.
Well, a National Security Advisor to the President John Bolton told the press last month, we now see plans for the Syrian regime to resume offensive military activities in Idlib province. We are obviously concerned about the possibility that Assad may use chemical weapons again. If the Syrian regime uses chemical weapons, we will respond very strongly.
Well, not only is the rhetoric getting stronger, but the Mediterranean Sea is getting hotter. Recently, another American guided missile cruiser packed with Tomahawk missiles arrived in the area along with U.S. strategic bombers. Now, the Russians, too, are actively moving more ships into the Mediterranean, and it is even thought they have sent submarines.
Well, it looks a lot like what occurred right before April 14th of this year when America, France, and the UK launched strikes on Syria after reports of a chemical weapons attack. Now, during the strikes, airports, military, and civilian objects were targeted, 103 missiles fired, and 71 intercepted.
Well, for more on the Syrian crisis, we now turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has the details on the recent downing of a Russian fighter jet and what Moscow plans to do about it. Larry?
There are serious questions as to what might have taken place with the Russian jet recently shot down over the Mediterranean Sea. But in a telling move, Russia has announced that it will be furnishing Syria with a S-300 surface-to-air missile defense system. Russia's Ministry of Defense says they believe that the move will cool some hot heads and prevent any further ill-judged moves in the future. Otherwise, he says, Russia might be forced to respond in the moment. Moscow believes that Israel violated bilateral agreements by only giving a mere minute or so warning before attempting a strike against Syria's Air Force. The S-300 missile defense system boasts a number of different features, including the ability to integrate and unify Syria's air defense network, and also it reportedly has the ability to identify friends or foes, which works to reduce or eliminate incidents of friendly fire. Moscow says the protection of its troops in Syria has been given top priority, and that goal can only be accomplished by improving Syria's air defense system and providing it with centralized control. Moscow says it's not sure what prompted Israel to cross the terms outlined in their bilateral agreement, especially at a time of heightened tensions, and Israel so far has not responded. The ominous trade war increasing between the U.S. and China has seen both sides responding with retaliation with tit-for-tat tariffs, and China is the latest one to return a blow. In an effort to justify its punches, however, Beijing is accusing the U.S. of bullying and is attempting to raise awareness among Americans of the economic impact the back and forth is having on U.S. citizens, farmers in particular, by running ads in American newspapers. Beijing says soybean farmers are being hurt heavily. The current president's administration is reported to be preparing $12 billion in relief for the nation's growers. The current administration is at the same time leveling accusations of tampering and interference against the Asian powerhouse related to upcoming elections in the United States in November. President Trump says China doesn't want him to win because he is the first president to challenge China on trade. And according to the president, America is not only challenging China, but it is also winning. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Interesting that we see the economic pressure being put on China by the United States, but also their retaliatory sanctions on the United States by China. And now the same threat we see taking place with China that, if you remember previously, was the same accusation against Russia with them meddling in the elections. And of course, after that, even more sanctions were put on Russia to try to put a little pressure on them to, you know, make life a little more difficult. So it'll be interesting to see how these things play out, because the United States relies on a lot from China.
Absolutely.
And of course, as it is the case with many situations, the citizens are the ones to pay for these back and forth sanctions.
Right.
Well, the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, is going through some tough times as the people of his nation want him to stand up against verbal attacks from the United States. But his goal is to prevent military confrontation with the world's most powerful country. Now, he said in an address, "Our intent is to ensure that the U.S. abides by laws, stops bullying, stops pressuring, maintains commitments, keeps promises that they sign on to, and adheres to UN resolutions. We say do not sanction illegally, unfairly, and unjustly. We say the sanctions of the United States are inhumane and they must stop bullying the world."
Well, Yemen's president, Mr. Mansour Hadi, told the UN's General Assembly that Iran must stop meddling in its country's affairs. He said at that address, "We are still in the grips of a war that was imposed upon our people by armed militias that are supported by Iran and Hezbollah. They are supported financially, through the media, and militarily. These militias are extremists. They employ gangster-like tactics."
Rouhani denied all those allegations, along with those of him sending weapons and fighters to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. But he was excited about the support that he got from the EU, Russia, and China. Now, some are wondering how long that support will last as the U.S. boosts diplomatic pressure on other nations.
Well, President Trump recently addressed the UN General Assembly and warned leaders of the world not to support a dictatorship regime. It was definitely a battle of words as the two presidents, Trump and Rouhani, spoke just hours apart from each other. Now, Trump said Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. Rouhani hit back by saying the U.S. is enemies of peace and perpetrators of war. Now, President Donald Trump does not approve of the Iran nuclear deal instituted by former U.S. President Obama.
According to the president, Mr. Trump, he said that the Iranian government exploited the agreement to dodge sanctions, he said, continue fooling its people, and expanding its toxic influence in the region. Now, Tehran is blaming Washington for threatening or treating agreements like rubbish and are not ruling out coming back to their nuclear programs as a measure in response. Well, the U.S. is bent on teaching Iran a lesson. In New York, the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor are going from event to event, hopping from one event after another, making open threats against Iran and anyone who even dares not only work with them, but even talk to them.
Wow. Well, at one of the events, Mike Pompeo was heckled by a protester who was quickly ushered out. Now, the protester said, "Stop the warmongering and peace with Iran." While the guests at the event booed her, telling security to get her out, Pompeo said that we must put pressure on the regime to rein in its destruction and to demand that Iran act like a normal country. John Bolton said at that same event, "If you cross us, our allies, or our partners, you harm our citizens. If you continue to lie, cheat, and deceive, yes, there will be hell to pay." Now, those statements were met with applause from the audience.
Well, political analyst Shabir Hassanali said in an interview with RT that I think Trump is playing a game where everyone is wrong, everyone is bad, everyone is ripping America off, and only Trump is right. America is essentially the empire, and it attempts to control a large part of the world, and when any country tries to become independent, they immediately become the enemy. This is a threat. Do not oppose me, and he's saying that referring to the United States of America.
Well, if the recent speeches at the UN General Assembly was any clue to you as to how relations are among the nations, how about this recent event? Now, Capitol Hill has been busy passing legislation. Recently, they passed a $670 billion spending bill.
And we know, as times have we've mentioned in the past, they've dumped a lot of money into the military. And they have plans for even more going into the military as they look forward into the future. And so it doesn't seem like the United States is really preparing for peace, because we can see, and you can hear from the testimonies of a lot of the leaders from the different countries, that when they do come to their area, they kind of leave it in turmoil, kind of leave it in worse shape that it was. So that money is being there, but it's not actually bringing forth the peace that the nations are desiring to see.
And remember also the report that we mentioned on the last broadcast, where just because they spend sometimes twice or three times, four times as much as other countries, doesn't mean, and that's what that report was saying, they're not necessarily predicted to win should they have a battle with Russia or China or something like that. So all that spending there, the U.S. hopes to be on top, but not necessarily going to be the case.
And we know there are no winners when it comes to war. Well, at that UN Assembly, French President Macron spoke on the issue of peace in the Middle East. In his address, he said, "What can resolve the crisis between Israel and Palestine? Surely not unilateral initiatives and not trampling on the rights of the Palestinian people to legitimate peace, nor underestimating the Israelis' rights to security. There is no credible alternative to the two-state solution, living side by side in peace and security with Jerusalem as its capital." So we can see the French president backing the same thing that President Trump is also pushing in that region right now.
Right. Well, lastly, let's take a look at a video of President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in New York recently as they discuss Israeli-U.S. relations and the goals for the future.
The American-Israeli alliance has never been stronger. It's stronger than ever before under your leadership. And I look forward to working with you and your team to advance our common interests, security, prosperity, and peace with Israel's neighbors and for the region. And we can do it with you.
There's nothing I would rather do than see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I think lots of good things are happening. It will take a little time, as you know. It's taken plenty of time, many decades, and nothing's happened. But a lot of good things are happening. Actually, by taking off the table the embassy moving to Jerusalem, that was always the primary ingredient as to why deals couldn't get done. Well, now that will also mean that Israel will have to do something that will be good for the other side. We're working on deals. I think that I really believe something will happen. They say it's the toughest of all deals. When they talk about tough deals, they always say Israel and the Palestinians. That's the toughest of all deals. It is a dream of mine to be able to get that done prior to the end of my first term. I don't want to do it in my second term. Well, that's a big chip that they got. I took probably the biggest chip off the table. And so obviously we have to start, we have to make a fair deal. We have to do something. Deals have to be good for both parties. Otherwise you don't have a deal and you don't have a lasting deal. So something will have to be done, but that's a very big chip. Israel got the first chip, and it's a big one. There's no question about it. I like two-state solution. I like two-state solution. I like two-state solution. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think works best. I don't even have to speak to anybody. That's my feeling. Now, you may have a different feeling. I don't think so, but I think two-state solution works best. I would say over the next 2 to 3 to 4 months, something like that. That would be the time that I'd like to at least release the plan. It is a very complex situation. but I think we have some brilliant ideas. Ideas that have never been thought of before, ideas that are good for both parties. And again, it has to be good for both parties.
Well, it's interesting, you know, we see friendships being made with certain countries while enemies are being made out of other countries. And of course, we know that some of the big players or key players in what we see taking place primarily in that area around the river Euphrates in the Middle East there, with China, Russia, Iran, you know, of course, Turkey. We didn't have anything on that, but we've had, you know, they're going through some issues right now. And of course, Big Brother, so to speak, you know, being involved in all these situations and really kind of stirring up the pot with a lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the threats, a lot of the sanctions. It's really not moving us any closer to finding a peaceful resolution that, you know, an agreement that everybody can agree with and everybody can go home with a smile on their face and benefits for all the citizens.
Right. Absolutely. If you'd like to find out more about these stories, you can contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website at YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by going to info@Yahweh.com. Also, any international calls, please call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, don't forget to check out the Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to AskYisrael.com. They're guaranteed to give you loads of information on any scriptural question you may have. Just go to the search bar, punch in what you're looking for, and watch pages and pages of results come up. You can spend hours reading through the answers that are found in those two great programs.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins bringing forth true solutions to today's problems, along with the peace that everyone is looking for. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.